I imagine we've all been in a season or experience where we really feel like our faith is being tested. Or maybe we've have a story or a past that we feel shameful of. And sometimes because of that, it makes us hard to depend and trust in God's goodness. Well, today we are looking at the story of Rahab. We're continuing this plot twist group study. And what we're going to see in her story is that God's grace, it reaches beyond our past. It reaches beyond any hurt or pain. And what we're going to see is through her plot twist, that God's character, it's worth trusting. We can stand firm on it, and it is unchanging and unfailing. So Rahab shows up in scripture in Joshua 2. This is where God's people, they have been wandering in the desert now for 40 years, and they are ready under Joshua's leadership to step into the promised land, to take and inherit what the Lord has promised them in the land of Canaan. This is what we see how God explains and describes this land to Moses in Exodus 3 as the land of milk and honey. But the land is not empty, that there are people groups there. And so this is why it's important for us to be mindful that when we're reading the book of Joshua, this is the first book of the historical writings of the Old Testament. And that means something for us as we are reading these stories, is that the historical narratives, they are historical narratives, not prescriptive instructions. They are telling us the story of God's people, not telling us how to do things. They are descriptive, not prescriptive. And in fact, the historical narratives of the Old Testament, they are actually written not for history's sake, but for theology's sake. And what that means is that they're not concerned so much with dates and numbers and timelines, but they are more concerned with expressing the character of God. And so as we look in these stories, that's the main thing that we can see and learn from, is how do we see God's character on display through these stories of the historical narratives. So the first obstacle for the people of God to inherit the land is the city of Jericho. Jericho was a powerful and prominent city in Canaan. It was a fortified city, which means it had thick walls that surrounded it. And so it is on the western edge of the land. It's right over the Jordan River, so it makes sense for them to enter this way. It's the gateway to Canaan, if you will. And this is where Rahab lives. She is a Canaanite woman. She lives in Jericho, and scripture tells us that she is a prostitute. And because of this, we can know that she would have been considered less than or unworthy in society and in culture. And at this point of the story, she is definitely an outsider. She is not a part of the people of God. And yet when two Israelite spies go into Jericho to kind of map out what they're confronting, it is Rahab who covers the spies, protects the spies, gives the spies refuge, and then she sends them safely on their way. Why is that? Because scripture tells us she's heard about the God of Israel. She knows the stories of God's people. She has heard the stories of their victories in the desert. She's heard the parting of the Red Sea, and she believes that he is real. Listen to what she says in Joshua chapter 2, verse 11. It says, "And as soon as we heard it," this is Rahab speaking, "our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth below." You see, this is such a powerful profession here for Rahab. I want you to think about her context. Think about what she does for a living. I mean, in that space and in that context, in that time, she would have been used by others. She would have been taken advantage of. She would have been mistreated. Can you imagine how much impact and how much that meant to her to hear of a God who cares for his people, who wants them to be free, who sets the captives free, who brings redemption, who rescues them? You see, this profession of Rahab, this is her plot twist. This isn't just her protecting the spies. This is her wanting to be a part and asking to be invited into God's story. And so before they leave, what the spies do when they can see this heartfelt confession, this proclamation that she is believing in their God, they tell her to hang a scarlet cord out her window, and that when they return, that everyone in her home will be unharmed and safe. So when she hangs the cord outside of her window, This echoes back to the Passover in Egypt, when Moses instructs the people to sacrifice a lamb and put the blood over the doorpost that death would pass over them. And so this is a visual picture of Rahab's faith in the one true God. This isn't just logistics for how to survive. This is Rahab's Passover. So we see here, Rahab's faith, though, it doesn't just save her own life. It becomes the first step in Israel's conquest for the land. So when they come back and tell Joshua all that they had seen, that enables them to have a military strategy of how they're going to engage Jericho. But the way that God has them engage Jericho is just about as unexpected as it was that Rahab would be the one who covered the spies. You see, God instructed the Israelites that they were going to march around the city of Jericho every day for 6 days, one time a day for 6 days. On the seventh day, they were going to march around it 7 times. They had to be quiet, and then they were going to shout, and then trumpets were going to blow, and then the walls were going to fall. You see, this is a picture, no matter how bizarre these instructions seem, this is a picture of the character of God, because the people were going to inherit the land not by force, but by faith. Not by anything of their own power or their own strength, but by being dependent on the strength and the power of God. They were going to inherit the land through faith, not force. And that's exactly the same catalyst for Rahab's plot twist. It's not performance or perfection. It is her faith. You see, it's not a passive faith or a fuzzy feel-good faith. Rahab had a faith that acted. And her faith wasn't based on her qualifications. It was based on God's reputation of what she had heard about the God of Israel. You see, God works through the faith of an outsider here to launch the fulfillment of his covenant promises. Talk about a picture of the heart and the character of God. A mustard seed of faith planted in the soil of a surrendered heart. That's all God needs to be able to move mountains and to write new endings. And so Rahab's story, what it does is she invites us to ask, is there a space in your life? Is there a circumstance in your life where you really need to trust and depend on God, where you feel like maybe your faith is at the end of its rope, and you just need to hang on to not what you can do, but what God can do. You need to trust in his goodness and his provision. Or maybe there's something about your story or your past or some skeleton you're trying to keep hidden in a closet, and you don't think then therefore you can trust that he is good. But these stories all show us the goodness and the character of God, that we can depend on him. You see, we also can read about Rahab all through the New Testament. She's mentioned in the lineage of Jesus, and she's talked about for her faithfulness. Specifically, she's listed in Hebrews as it's the hall of faith. It's about men and women who showed their love for God and their faithfulness through different actions. And at the beginning of that chapter in Hebrews 11, it defines faith. Listen to this, chapter 11 of Hebrews. Verse 1, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for the conviction of things not seen. And how perfectly does that define the faith that we see here in Rahab's story? She hadn't seen God's people. She hadn't seen them walk through the Red Sea. She hadn't seen the plague. She hadn't seen them defeat these armies, but she had heard of the good news of the God of Israel, and she had faith. And that faith became a plot twist in her story. God was able to work through the faith that she had in him to change the trajectory of not just her life, but of the Hebrew people's life. And so maybe today you are looking for a plot twist. You need something to change. You need a break. You're looking for that breakthrough. And I want to ask you, is it faith in God that you're leaning on, or maybe faith in your own self? So Rahab shows us how to have faith in God and not to have faith in ourselves and our circumstances. It's not a flashy faith. It's not a loud faith, but it's a steady, consistent trust in who God is. And when we recognize that, we recognize his goodness and his unfailing character, then we'll walk into the plot twist that he has written for us.